Xinjiang region, a landlocked sandy corner in northwest China where for centuries a history and culture has flourished among people living on the edge of the vast Taklamakan Desert. Chinese authorities have locked up more than 1 million people in fortified detention centers. Our team crisscrossed Xinjiang over 9 days to investigate China's crackdown on the Uyghurs. I'm Sophia Yan, China correspondent for the Daily Telegraph.
Don't touch me!
Why can't I see this? Why can't we come up here?
In this video series, we examine what's happening now on the ground in Xinjiang. This is what we encountered. I'm Sophia Yan. I've been China correspondent for The Telegraph over the last 3 years and have covered this region for a decade. I last reported from Xinjiang in 2019. I was keen to return to bring the world images and information, details, to see really what was happening on the ground and really what's a very remote corner of the world that in fabric is much more like Baghdad than Beijing. The government has repeatedly said that it welcomes foreign journalists to the region to see for themselves. China wants journalists to broadcast sanitized images of the Uyghurs of Xinjiang. And reality, of course, very different, and there were a lot of efforts to shape what we could do, what we could see. Indeed, to a certain extent, people seem to be able to live a somewhat normal life, albeit under the watchful gaze of community informants and also digital surveillance. But the story is far more complex, as we found over 9 days on assignment. I traveled with videographer Lawrence Huber. We were stopped in city centers, in rural villages, even deep in the desert. Sometimes the police and plainclothes minders let us go. Sometimes they didn't. At one point, we were detained for 2.5 hours.
I said, why can't we just leave?
No.
But why?
In these moments, it's pretty bewildering. It can escalate very quickly. These people weren't identifying themselves, but they were demanding a lot of us to delete pictures, to delete footage. They wanted to see our passports. In that moment, we had to stand up for what we were doing. We were in public areas. We were being journalists. There was no reason why we couldn't be in the places that we had gone, trying to find the story. But these were efforts, we think, by the state, by agents of the state, to restrict what we could do and what we could see.
Touch me. Don't touch me. Don't touch me.
It's certainly never a pleasant feeling to experience something like that. At one point we had 30 people against 2. One man grabbed me at the neck. 3 others latched onto the back of my backpack and pulled me backwards. Both Lawrence and I got hit in the face. My lip was bleeding, which in the heat of the moment I didn't realize until much later. At first they said that we were in a military zone and couldn't be there. Then they said we had trespassed onto company property and were trying to steal trade secrets. Now, keep in mind we were in the middle of a field. They even went so far as to accuse us of having illegally snuck into China because few foreigners were being allowed in given COVID. But both Lawrence and I are based in country and have been here since COVID erupted last year. Some of these people, some of these 30 men we recognized, they had been following us earlier in the day. And they were definitely there for us. They referenced some of our recent travel history. As journalists, of course, we're on the go pretty often. And the fact that they knew where we had been tells us that they were watching and tailing our every move. Even when we left, these men followed us for hours to make sure we wouldn't turn back. We walked through the desert until we finally reached a small road, at which point we had to hitchhike. We found a very generous farmer and rode on the back of his cart for a bit, then 2 friends in their car, all the way until we found a point where we could then hail a taxi back into town. But later that night, when we were grabbing a bite, we noticed that there were more men watching us. the risk is always that we could lose everything that we've gathered. Sometimes the aim really is to just hold us up, to prevent us, to take up time and to prevent us from working. Other times it's to harass and intimidate altogether. It's really a strong effort to prevent foreign journalists from doing their job.
What are you doing?
What's interesting is that this kind of experience gives us some insight into the police state that has proliferated in Xinjiang. It's used against Uyghurs and at times against foreign journalists. Now, this kind of very close surveillance and activity, it's clear that the system was successful in tracking us from location to location and keeping tabs on what we were doing. Obviously, these people that we met on the road who kept trying to block us from reporting, clearly they were springing into action always at the right moment. These plainclothes men, we think, were hired by state security, by the police. Perhaps they were officers themselves, but really there to keep tabs on what we were doing and to make sure that there were certain things we couldn't see.
No photo.
But it says it's a school. Is it?
The constant threat through our trip was that it wasn't allowed, that what we were doing wasn't allowed, even though, again, we were in public areas, public spaces. Really made me wonder what exactly is allowed then in Xinjiang if everywhere we went, we were encountering these kinds of obstacles. It's very eerie to walk past one of these facilities and to think about how many people may have cycled through. In my interviews with former detainees, they've told me about being shoved 20 to a cell with one window. And when you're outside one of these compounds, these vast, vast compounds, you can see that there are many buildings, and on just even one side, there are a number of windows. It's easy math, and once you do it, you get a sense of the scale of the situation. I spent a lot of time looking through cracks and through gates, trying to get a sense of what these places really looked like. I tried getting snippets of conversation. It's hard to speak with Uyghurs. They are afraid to speak freely, especially given what many of them have been through. Trying to get information out of a country that's this opaque is a challenge. Compared to what I've experienced before in Xinjiang, there does seem to be a move to try to make it look a little bit more palatable. There's less of a military presence. It's a move to try, again, to normalize what you see and what you're going through in terms of all the security and checkpoints, but it's not gone away. Beijing indeed has started to focus more on propaganda, on presenting Xinjiang as a wonderful place. There's an image that China wants the world to see of Xinjiang, of the Uyghurs. In general, China's propaganda has been very successful, especially at home. Han Chinese I met said that they were proud that the government had been successful in dealing with this would-be terrorist threat. They explained away the heavy security presence as necessary for public safety, and a lot of them said that the Western criticism directed at China over Xinjiang and alleged human rights abuses were because the West wanted to restrict the rise of China. School children are learning only what's state-sanctioned. Some of them approached us, curious to meet a foreigner. I asked them to teach me a couple of words and phrases in Uyghur, but very quickly it became clear that they were far more fluent in Mandarin. Uyghurs themselves worry that in less than a generation, their language, culture, history, traditions will disappear altogether. Who knows what I'll find next time I travel there.